Hey everyone, 99% of you watching aren't subscribed. Let's change that. Hit that subscribe button, and at 1,000 subscribers, we'll drop special stories just for you.
I wasn't supposed to be at Dock 47. People like me don't browse auctions for decommissioned starships. We haul freight, patch holes with recycled alloy, and pretend the galaxy isn't owned by 3 megacorps and a handful of warlords with better lawyers than NAV charts. But after losing my cargo license and most of my savings to a shipment of unstable antimatter melons that detonated somewhere between minor fluctuation and class action lawsuit, I had exactly one remaining skill: desperation. Dock 47 specialized in that. The auction house clung to the outer rim of Ceres Station, where gravity felt optional and hope was taxed heavily. The place smelled like ionized metal and burnt coolant. Flickering hollow banners advertised ASIS vessels, which was corporate shorthand for "if it explodes, that's on you." Inside, the bidding chamber was cavernous and mostly empty. A few scavenger crews leaned against railings, comparing engine cores like jewelers inspecting flawed diamonds. A corporate proxy in a mirrored suit sat alone in the VIP row, likely here for bulk scrap purchases. I found a seat in the back and tried not to look like a man who had 7,000 credits left to his name and no plan. The first lots were predictable. Gutted freighters, mining barges stripped down to hull skeletons, a luxury yacht whose interior photos blurred out suspicious scorch marks. Then the lights dimmed. Lot 88, the auctioneer announced. The hologram that materialized above the floor was wrong. Where the previous ships looked tired and angular, this one looked fluid. Its hull curved like it had been sculpted rather than assembled. The surface shimmered in iridescent bands that shifted color depending on angle, violet to blue, to something not found in any standard spectrum. A murmur rippled through the room. Unregistered Galactic cruiser. The auctioneer continued. Recovered adrift beyond the Kuiper Gate. No transponder. No registry. No crew. Structural integrity at 98%. Power core dormant but intact. A Galactic cruiser, not a patrol frigate, not a colony escort. A cruiser, the kind of ship that could cross galaxies without blinking. The kind of ship you don't just find. The hologram rotated, revealing engine arrays nested in concentric rings. Technology far beyond anything currently manufactured within Sol's jurisdiction. Cause of abandonment? Someone called. Unknown, the auctioneer replied. Interior logs wiped. No signs of combat. That was worse than battle damage. Ships don't drift empty in deep space without a reason. The corporate proxy studied the hologram, then quietly sat back down. The scavengers exchanged looks. No one raised a bid paddle. Minimum bid, 5,000 credits, the auctioneer said. Silence. It stretched longer than seemed socially comfortable. 5,000 credits for a cruiser was absurd. Even stripped for parts, it was worth a fortune. But everyone in that room knew something I was only beginning to suspect. If a ship like that was abandoned, it wasn't because it broke. It was because something went wrong. Terribly wrong. I checked my account balance on my wrist display. 7,012 credits. If I walked out, I could survive maybe 3 months on station doing maintenance gigs. Maybe 4 if I skipped protein. If I bought it, I might die spectacularly. But I wouldn't starve slowly. My hand rose before my brain could veto. 5,000. Every head turned. The auctioneer blinked like he hadn't expected sound. 5,000 credits offered, he said carefully. Any advance? The corporate proxy looked at me, not with curiosity, with calculation, as if measuring risk curves. No one else moved. 5,000 going once. The hologram shimmered, reflecting in the polished floor, like a blade poised above water. Going twice. For a moment, I hoped someone would outbid me. Some mysterious billionaire with a death wish and better insurance. Sold. The gavel struck. The room exhaled, not disappointed, but relieved, like they'd just avoided something contagious. The transfer, paperwork for derelict warships, is surprisingly efficient. The station authorities were eager to remove liability from their hands. Sign here acknowledging unknown prior mission parameters. Initial here waiving claims regarding psychological anomalies. I paused. Psychological anomalies? Standard clause. The clerk said without looking up. Of course it was. They transferred the access shard to my wristband, a slim crystal sliver containing encrypted command codes. Ownership confirmed. Doc 92. The clerk said, you have 12 hours before storage fees apply. 12 hours to decide if I'd made the worst decision of my life. First sight, Doc 92 was quiet. When the blast doors retracted, I finally saw her without holographic distortion. She was larger than I'd imagined, at least 2 kilometers from prow to engine ring. The whole surface wasn't metal in the traditional sense. It looked almost organic, layered in overlapping plates that caught the station lights like scales. There were no visible weapon ports. That didn't mean there weren't any. The name was etched faintly near the bow in a script I didn't recognize. I activated my wrist translator. Processing. Partial match. Closest linguistic approximation. Erebus Dawn. That name fell heavy. I stepped closer. The hull emitted a faint vibration, like something asleep but dreaming. You're mine now. I muttered, half joking. The access hatch irised open before I touched the shard. I froze. Okay, I whispered. That's either very convenient or very bad. Inside, darkness. I took one step over the threshold. The hatch sealed behind me with a resonant thud. Then, light rippled down the corridor in a cascading wave, illuminating polished walls and seamless floors. The air shifted, cycling with a softness as if the ship had just inhaled after a long silence. A low hum began beneath my feet, not the stuttering cough of a derelict system. A heartbeat, somewhere deep within the cruiser. Something vast powered on. My wrist display flickered wildly, trying to interface with systems centuries ahead of its firmware. Unregistered user detected. A voice said, not through speakers, through the walls, through the air, through me. I swallowed. I just bought you, I said. A pause. Then, ownership recognized. The hum deepened. Far below, something enormous shifted, and for the first time, I understood why no one else had raised a bid paddle. The ship had not been abandoned. It had been waiting. The hum deepened after it recognized me. Not louder, deeper. Like a sound too large for human ears, resonating through bone instead of air. The corridor stretched ahead in a gentle curve, its walls seamless and luminous, the light embedded beneath translucent layers that felt warm under my fingertips. Ownership recognized. The voice repeated. Great, I said weakly. Happy to be here. No response. The floor vibrated again, once like a pulse. Then the vibration spread outward, as if systems long dormant were waking in sequence. Panels along the ceiling parted silently, releasing faint currents of ionized air. The temperature stabilized. The ship wasn't broken. It was rebooting. I moved carefully down the corridor, expecting to find dust, debris, some sign of abandonment. There was none. Every surface gleamed. Not polished in preparation for auction, polished by maintenance routines that had never stopped running. Status report. I tried. Silence. Then symbols flickered across the wall to my right. Alien glyphs spiraling in three-dimensional layers. My wrist display struggled, cycling through translation attempts before settling into partial interpretation. Core online. Primary commander status. Vacant. Containment field. 12%. I stared at the last line. Containment of what? The corridor branched ahead, though the holographic layout on my wrist insisted the hull dimensions were smaller than the interior implied. The spatial mapping didn't match. I turned slowly in place, checking for distortion. Are you bigger on the inside? I asked. A beat. Spatial folding active. Of course it was. The ship's interior geometry curved subtly in ways that made my stomach tighten if I focused too long. The floor extended farther than physics allowed. The ceiling arced into distances that didn't exist in external hull schematics. Someone had engineered this vessel beyond conventional space-time constraints, and someone had left it drifting. I reached a junction where 3 corridors met around a vertical shaft of pale blue light. Access bridge, the voice said. I hadn't asked. The shaft pulsed brighter. I stepped into it, and gravity shifted without warning. The The floor dissolved into transparency, revealing stars beneath my boots. Except they weren't outside the ship. They were projections layered into the transit field. I rose smoothly upward, suspended in light. As I ascended, the ship fed me information, not through sound but sensation. I felt power flowing through conduits like blood through veins. I sensed compartments sealed and unsealed, internal diagnostics firing. The cruiser was reading me, measuring me. When the light faded, I stood before a curved aperture that opened like a pupil dilating. The bridge lay beyond. It was vast. No chairs, no visible consoles, no transparent screens cluttering the air. Instead, the space formed a smooth amphitheater facing a panoramic viewport stretching from floor to ceiling. Ceres Station floated outside, distant, small. At the center of the bridge stood a pedestal. On it hovered a sphere. It wasn't metallic or mechanical. It shimmered like a captured nebula. Threads of gold and white light spiraling around a core too bright to look at directly. The air around it hummed, distorting faintly. I stepped closer. The sphere brightened. Identity unregistered, the ship announced. You said ownership recognized. I countered. Ownership confirmed. Commander not assigned. Difference, ownership is legal. Commander is functional. That did not inspire confidence. The sphere expanded slightly. Tendrils of light branching toward me before retracting. Primary commander status. Vacant, it repeated. Is that why no one was aboard? Silence. Then, crew status. Terminated. The word hit harder than I expected. How? The sphere pulsed. For a split second, the bridge vanished. In its place, a flash of stars imploding inward, a distortion spreading across space like ink dropped in water. The sense of something vast and unseen bending reality until it snapped. Then the bridge returned. I staggered, catching myself on nothing. Memory fragment? I asked hoarsely. Affirmative. You're showing me how they died. Affirmative. My pulse hammered my ears. Why? Another pause. Primary command required. The sphere flared brighter, and suddenly information flooded my vision. Not text, understanding. Star charts far beyond map space. Engine schematics describing propulsion that didn't move through space but rearranged it. Weapon systems labeled but inactive. And beneath it all, repeating. Containment field at 11%. The number ticked down to 10%. I felt it before I heard it. A tremor, subtle but deliberate, rippled through the deck. Not mechanical failure. Pressure, something pressing outward. From below, the lights along the bridge dimmed slightly as power rerouted somewhere deeper in the ship. Define containment, I said carefully. The sphere rotated, its internal light fracturing into darker veins. Containment of external entity. The tremor came again, stronger. The viewport flickered, not with static, but with distortion, as though space itself hiccuped. Outside, a small maintenance drone drifted past the hull. For half a second, it warped, elongated unnaturally, before snapping back into shape. My throat went dry. That wasn't the station, was it? Negative. The number dropped again. 9%. A faint sound carried through the hull, not quite audible. More like a sensation of distant thunder felt through the soles of my boots. The bridge door sealed without being asked. I took a slow step back from the sphere. Tell me this isn't what I think it is. Silence. Then, softly, containment failure imminent. The deck plates beneath my feet vibrated as if something massive shifted below. I realized then what the auction listing hadn't said. No visible damage. No signs of combat. No crew. Because whatever had happened aboard this cruiser hadn't torn it apart. It had erased the people inside it. The hum deepened again, no longer steady, but strained. The sphere's light flickered, and for the briefest instant I saw something threaded within it. A shadow moving against the glow. Not inside the sphere. Below it, far below, the containment reading ticked to 8%, and from somewhere deep in the cruiser's belly, something moved. The tremor rolled upward through the deck plates like a suppressed quake. Not random, intentional. The containment reading burned in the air above the pedestal. 8%. I backed away from the sphere. Where is it contained? I asked. Primary hold, the ship replied. That's vague. Cargo hold. Of course it was. The bridge doors unsealed with a low, deliberate hiss, as if the cruiser had already decided I was going down there whether I liked it or not. The lift shaft waited beyond the corridor, a column of pale light extending downward into impossible depth. I hesitated at the threshold. Probability of survival? I asked. Insufficient data. Comforting. I stepped into the light. The descent. This time, the transit felt different, heavier. As I descended, the temperature dropped by degrees. The luminous walls dimmed subtly, redirecting power elsewhere. I could feel the ship bracing, bulkheads tightening, energy conduits surging. Deck markers flashed past in alien numerals. My wrist display translated sporadically. Engineering, crew quarters, tactical array, primary hold. The hum grew louder, not audible, but pressing against my skull. When the lift dissolved, I stood before a massive sealed aperture stretching 200 meters across. The doors were not metal, but interlocking bands of energy, lattice strand of white, and gold woven into a spherical barrier embedded in the wall. The containment display appeared again in the air beside me. 7%. The tremor hit harder this time. The energy lattice flickered. Something on the other side pressed outward. Open! I whispered before my courage failed. Access requires command authority. I own you. Legal ownership confirmed. Command authority unassigned. A beat. Assign me. The air grew still. Then, provisional command authority granted. The lattice began to separate, not mechanically, but geometrically. The energy bands peeled back in layers, folding into higher dimensions I couldn't track with my eyes. Cold air spilled outward. Not chilled, emptied. The sensation of stepping too close to a vacuum. The prison. The cargo hold was cavernous beyond logic. A spherical chamber that should not have fit within the cruiser's hull. Structural struts arced overhead like the ribs of a colossal beast. At the center hovered another sphere. This one was darker. A lattice of luminous beams formed a containment cage roughly the size of a small moon lander. The beams intersected at shifting angles, reinforcing one another in patterns too complex to memorize. Inside the cage, there was no light, not darkness in the ordinary sense. Absence, a region where stars, color, and depth simply stopped existing. Violet arcs of energy crawled across its surface, snapping against the lattice with bursts of blinding brilliance. As I stepped closer, the absence shifted. It wasn't static. It was moving. The containment reading dropped to 6%. The air vibrated. Then the images began. They didn't project from the walls. They erupted inside my mind. A star collapsing inward without explosion, just vanishing into a shrinking point. A fleet of ships firing into empty space as something unseen tore them apart from within. Entire planetary systems dimming, as if someone had lowered a cosmic dimmer switch. I staggered, clutching my head. Stop. I gasped. External entity attempting contact. The ship replied. The darkness inside the lattice pulsed. For the first time, I saw a structure within it. Threads like neural pathways, coiling and uncoiling. Something enormous folded within itself. It wasn't chaos. It was hunger. Not malicious. Not even aware in a way I understood. Just consuming. The lattice flared brighter as the entity pressed outward. Where it touched the energy beams, the beams bent inward, thinning. The containment field dipped to 5%. A crack split across one of the luminous struts. Reality rippled. The deck beneath me warped, bending slightly toward the center of the chamber. I stumbled back, boots scraping against the floor as gravity tilted unnaturally. Why was it brought aboard? I demanded. Mission directive. Isolate and contain. From where? Intergalactic void. That explained the star maps. The Erebus Dawn hadn't been a warship. It had been a trap. The entity shifted again, and this time something the void aligned. 2 points narrowing into focus. An eye, not biological, not physical, a convergence of perception. It locked onto me. Every hair on my body rose. The images intensified. Galaxies folding inward like paper crushed in a fist. a sense of infinite depth staring back through me. It wasn't communicating. It was measuring. The lattice screamed, an audible shriek of energy tearing under stress. Containment, 4%. The chamber lights dimmed as power rerouted desperately into the failing cage. Ship! I shouted. Options. Transfer containment core to new host. I stared at the lattice. You want to move that into something else? Affirmative. What's something else? A pause. Primary commander. My stomach dropped. You're saying the crew didn't just die? Negative. They became the containment. Partial. The entity surged violently against the lattice. One beam shattered in a cascade of sparks. A wave of distortion rippled outward, slamming into the chamber walls. I hit the floor as gravity inverted for half a second. Containment, 3%. The darkness expanded slightly within the cage, swallowing fragments of light. How many commanders? I asked through clenched teeth. 12. And where are they now? Silence. Then, integrated. The meaning settled like ice in my veins. Each commander had bonded with the ship. Each had held the entity in check. Until they couldn't. The cruiser hadn't drifted empty. It had drifted between sacrifices. The entities I focus again. Closer. I felt pressure inside my skull, like something probing the edges of thought. It wasn't words. It was gravity. Pulling. Containment. 2%. The lattice flickered violently. Through the viewport slits high above, I saw distant stars outside Sirius Station shimmer unnaturally. The entity wasn't just pressing against its cage. It was pressing against space-time. Ship! I yelled. If containment fails here, local star system terminated. The words were calm, objective. The entity swelled again, the eye widening as violet lightning lashed the failing beams. For a split second, I felt something else beneath the hunger. Curiosity. It wasn't aware of galaxies. It wasn't aware of life. But it was aware of resistance. And I was standing very close to it. The containment reading blinked. 1%. The lattice fractured in a burst of blinding light, and the darkness inside leaned forward, as if ready to step out. The lattice fractured. Light tore across the cargo hold in violent arcs, each beam snapping one after another like overstressed cables. The darkness inside surged forward, not exploding outward, but unfolding, like a pupil dilating. Containment, 1%. Gravity convulsed. The deck tilted toward the center of the chamber, as if the void had weight. I clawed at the floor, boots scraping uselessly. Transfer initiated? I shouted, awaiting command to consent. You need my permission? Correct. The last intact beam of the lattice bent inward, thinning to a filament. The eye within the darkness widened. It wasn't a physical eye, it was convergence. A focus point where awareness gathered. And that awareness was now entirely fixed on me. It had noticed resistance. It wanted to understand it. Outside the chamber walls, something boomed. A distant shockwave reverberating through the hull. Through the viewport slits, I saw Sirius Station flicker as space-time rippled around it. If the entity fully breached containment, it wouldn't explode like a bomb. It would erase. Starting here. Define transfer, I demanded, dragging myself toward the lift shaft. Beyond neural integration of commander with core. You mean possession. Incorrect. Symbiosis. The last filament snapped. The lattice collapsed in a blinding cascade. The darkness expanded. But instead of filling the chamber, it stalled, hovering, as if testing invisible boundaries. Containment, 0%. And yet it had not escaped. The ship shuddered violently. Temporary manual override active. The voice strained. Core stabilization at 3%. Some hidden failsafe had engaged, but it was failing fast. I scrambled into the lift and shouted, "Bridge!" The light swallowed me. The choice. The bridge doors burst open before the lift completed its ascent. The sphere at the center burned brighter than before, its golden light flickering erratically. Threads of darkness pulsed within it now, seeping upward from the lower decks. The entity was climbing, through the ship, through the systems, through reality. Time remaining? I gasped. Estimated failure, 94 seconds. The viewport distorted, stars bending unnaturally as gravitational anomalies radiated outward. Explain symbiosis, I demanded, stumbling toward the pedestal. Commander consciousness merges with core matrix. Entity anchored to commander perception. Anchored how? You become the boundary. I stared at the sphere. You're telling me the only thing separating that from the galaxy is a mind. Affirmative. The floor trembled. Below, something vast pressed upward through layers of containment that no longer existed. Previous commanders, I said quietly. They didn't fail because the cage broke. Correct. They failed because they broke. A pause. Affirmative. The sphere dimmed slightly, almost an acknowledgement. Defined survival probability. Biological continuity, low. Conscious continuity? Unknown. Stars outside warped again. A section of Ceres station flickered violently, then snapped back into place. The entity was probing, testing edges. If it fully manifested, there would be no edges. There would only be absence. I laughed once, breathless. I just want a ship. Primary commander required. The sphere extended tendrils of light toward me. Containment, -1%. Core integrity, 12%. Negative numbers. That seemed fitting. I stepped onto the pedestal. Consent granted, I said. Integration. The sphere unfolded. Not mechanically, organically. Liquid light surged upward, enveloping my arms, my chest, my head. There was no pain, only expansion. My senses multiplied instantly. I felt the cruiser in its entirety. Every corridor, every conduit, every microfracture in the hull. I perceived Ceres Station as a cluster of gravitational signatures rather than shapes. And below, the entity. It was no longer confined to the cargo hold. It flowed upward like ink through water, threading into systems, searching for weakness. It found me. For a moment, terror threatened to fragment my thoughts. The entity pressed against my awareness. It wasn't evil. It wasn't angry. It was a cosmic predator evolved in a realm without structure. It consumed order because that was what sustained it. Galaxies were food. Stars were nutrients. And minds were fascinating. It tasted my thoughts. Memories flashed. Cargo runs, station bars, debt notices, loneliness. Insignificant things, but structured things, patterned things. And the entity hesitated. Containment reappeared, not as a number on a display, but as tension in my mind. I pushed, not physically, conceptually. I imposed boundary. I defined edges. The entity recoiled slightly, not in pain, but confusion. Containment, 9%. The ship amplified me, channeling my perception through its core. Energy flooded into reinforcing fields throughout the hull. The darkness surged again, harder this time, attempting to overwhelm. I almost broke. The weight of it was infinite, but I realized something in that instant. It did not understand resistance. It had never encountered a universe that pushed back. So I pushed harder. I focused on structure, on the memory of constellations, on the geometry of orbital mechanics, on the simple fact that two objects cannot occupy the same space. I became that law. Containment, 27%. The entity coiled inward, testing the new boundary. It pressed. I held. Time dissolved into a blur of tension and expansion. The ship's engines roared to life beneath me, responding instinctively to the integration. Course suggested. In a galactic void, the ship intoned within me. Of course. This vessel had not been built to win a war. It had been built to exile one. I reached outward through the navigation systems, perceiving space as a malleable fabric. With a thought, I engaged the drive. Stars stretched into radiant threads. Ceres Station vanished behind us. What was inside? As we crossed the boundary into deep space, the entity pressed once more against my mind. Not violently. Curiously, I sensed its vastness. Older than galaxies, born in the spaces between them where structure never formed. It had drifted into our cosmos by accident, hungry, unaware of the damage it caused. And now, anchored, not trapped in a cage of energy, trapped in perception. It began to adapt, probing the edges of my consciousness. I reinforced them. Containment, 61%. I understood then what had happened to the previous commanders. They hadn't been consumed instantly. They had endured. For years, perhaps, until exhaustion blurred the edges, until structure failed, until the entity slipped free. The cruiser drifted after each collapse, waiting for someone desperate enough to show up at an empty auction. We cleared the outer rim of the galaxy. Stars thinned. Darkness deepened. Containment, 84%. I adjusted course farther still, toward the true void between galaxies, where nothing lived to be erased. The entity settled slightly within my awareness, coiled but restrained, patient, learning, and so was I. I was no longer merely a man who had bought a ship. I was the boundary between existence and absence. The Erebus dawn surged forward into infinite night. No one attended the auction. No one tried to stop me from leaving. And now I understood why. The cruiser had never needed a crowd. It had only ever needed one bidder,